The email arrived at 11:47 p.m., subject line blank, sender masked behind a generic legal service. Attached was a scanned draft, unsigned, incomplete, but detailed enough to chill the room. Intent to file for dissolution. My name spelled correctly. Dates precise. Asset estimates itemized to the dollar. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the ceiling fan until it completed 3 full rotations, listening to the quiet tick of the wall clock, the house breathing the way it always did at night. Then I closed my laptop without replying and went to bed. In the morning, life looked normal. Coffee hissed. The sun cut a soft line across the kitchen counter. My wife, Lena, hummed while buttering toast like nothing had happened. We talked about groceries. About her sister's birthday. About nothing important. I watched her hands, steady, practiced, hands that had once shaken when we signed our first lease together. After breakfast, she sat across from me, folded her napkin, and said it like a rehearsal line. I think we should talk about divorce. There it was. Cling. Come. A word she'd been test driving for weeks. I didn't ask why. I didn't defend myself. I didn't bargain. I simply nodded like a man acknowledging the weather. If that's what you want, I said. Okay. She blinked. The confidence slipped for half a second. She recovered quickly, launching into a prepared speech, how we'd grown apart, how she needed freedom, how this was best for both of us. She mentioned fairness. She mentioned timelines. She mentioned lawyers. She did not mention the email. I listened. Not passively, precisely. The way you listen when you're memorizing something. By noon, she'd already told 2 friends. By evening, she was sending messages from the bedroom, her voice hushed, urgent, as if the house itself might overhear. When she emerged, she told me she'd stay with her sister for a while. She packed lightly, taking the blue carry-on we bought on our 10th anniversary. She left her winter coat. That night, I reopened the laptop. The draft was still there. So were the numbers. A new line caught my eye, anticipated consent. Someone had assumed I would resist. Someone had planned for it. I pulled bank statements from the last 3 years. Downloaded transaction histories. I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. Patterns reveal themselves when you stop arguing with them. Transfers that repeated on the same dates. Withdrawals just under reporting thresholds. An account I didn't recognize, opened 18 months ago, co-signed by someone who wasn't me. At 2:13 a.m. my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Then another. You'll be taken care of if you cooperate. I put the phone face down and went to sleep. The next day, Lena called to check in. Her tone was gentle, careful, as if she were handling glass. Are you okay? She asked. I am, I said. I agree. Let's do this properly. There was a pause. Long enough to hear her exhale. She thought agreement meant surrender. She thought calm meant weakness. I let her think that, because the moment you stop fighting, people start showing you exactly who they are, and what they've already taken. I didn't call a lawyer that day. I didn't confront her. I didn't even tell anyone what I'd found. Instead, I verified. I pulled the original statements directly from the bank's portal, not the PDFs she'd emailed me months ago, for our records. I compared timestamps. Exported CSVs. Ran the numbers myself. The pattern tightened like a knot you don't feel until you pull both ends. Every month, 2 days after my salary cleared, the same amount moved, never round, always precise, into an account labeled as a savings buffer. The account didn't exist in our shared dashboard. It never had. I traced the routing number to a regional branch across town. The co-signer's initials matched her sister's. Dates matter when you're done guessing. 18 months ago the account opened. 16 months ago, Lena started talking about space. 14 months ago, she asked me to switch my bonus structure to deferred payouts for tax reasons. I pulled our tax filings. Schedule B told the truth she never had to. Interest earned, small, steady, reported under her name only. Perfectly legal. Perfectly hidden. I printed everything and laid it out on the dining table like a map. By evening, I had witnesses without speaking to a single person. Metadata is honest. A shared cloud folder still synced on my laptop. Forgotten permissions. Inside, drafts of messages I was never meant to see. Screenshots of listings. A spreadsheet titled Transition Plan. Tabs named Post-Divorce Housing Cash Flow. She hadn't just planned to leave. She'd planned to arrive somewhere else intact. At 9:04 p.m. my phone rang. Lena's sister this time. Friendly. Overly warm. Hey, we just wanted to make sure you're doing okay, she said. This doesn't have to be ugly. I thanked her. Told her I appreciated the concern. Asked no questions. After the call, I opened the last attachment from the anonymous email, the one I'd ignored the first time. Buried on page 9 was a clause marked standard. It wasn't. It referenced a valuation addendum that didn't exist yet. A placeholder for assets that hadn't been disclosed because they hadn't been contested. They were waiting for me to argue. Waiting for anger to make me sloppy. Waiting for consent to turn into exhaustion. At midnight, I backed everything up twice, offline and encrypted. I wrote a timeline. Not a story. A ledger. Names, dates, amounts, locations. No adjectives. No conclusions. The next morning, Lena texted. My lawyer says we can keep this simple if you're still agreeable. I replied with one word. Yes. That afternoon, I walked into the branch across town. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked for information on joint accounts tied to my tax ID. The clerk paused, then nodded. There was one. Opened with limited visibility. My signature wasn't on it, but my income was. That was the moment doubt ended. I stepped outside and felt the city move around me, cars, voices, the low ordinary hum of people who didn't know they were being counted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was clear. Because betrayal isn't loud when it's real. It's organized. It leaves receipts. And once you have proof, patience stops being restraint and becomes strategy. I didn't change my routine. That was the first rule. Same alarm. Same train. Same neutral replies. People reveal themselves fastest when nothing pushes back. Lena texted every few days, updates framed as courtesy. My lawyer's drafting something. We're aiming for an amicable timeline. I responded with short confirmations. No questions. No friction. Agreement, offered gently, has a way of making people careless. She started calling again at night. Not to talk about feelings, about logistics. What I planned to keep. What I could let go of. She used that phrase a lot. Let go. As if property dissolved when you stopped holding it. I listened. I took notes afterward. Her sister stopped pretending. The warmth thinned. The calls became instructive. You don't want this dragging on, she said once. I don't, I agreed. They began to speak freely, assuming the outcome was sealed. Dates slipped. Numbers grew bolder. A new apartment lined up already. A job opportunity that might require liquidity. They spoke as if my consent had already been notarized. Meanwhile, I watched. I watched the account balance swell, fed by money that still passed through my name first. I watched withdrawals sync with their planning calls. I watched as Lena updated her mailing address on 2 services but forgot a third, the one that still sent statements to the house. I didn't open her mail. I didn't need to. The envelopes told enough by their frequency and return address. At work, I stayed invisible. No requests. No drama. I declined a promotion I was offered and asked for a temporary extension on my current role instead. Stability looks like stagnation to people who expect you to unravel. On a Thursday evening, Lena asked to meet. Neutral ground. A cafe near the park. She wore the coat she'd left behind like a concession. I think we're handling this really maturely, she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. I appreciate how calm you've been. I nodded. I want us both to land on our feet, she added. That word again. Land. She slid a document across the table. A preliminary agreement. Balanced on the surface. Generous enough to sound fair. It proposed timelines that favored urgency. It omitted accounts I knew existed. It assumed assets I knew were incomplete. I skimmed it. Didn't object. I'll review it, I said. Her relief was immediate. She talked too much after that. About the neighborhood she liked. About how exhausting the last year had been. About how free she already felt. She never asked how I felt. When we parted, she hugged me. A brief, careful contact. I didn't resist. Resistance teaches people where to press. That night, I updated the timeline. Added her statements. Logged the document version. Saved the cafe receipt. Date, time, location. Small things. Small things become anchors later. I noticed a shift after that meeting. The messages became confident. Deadlines tightened. Politeness thinned. She began to imply consequences. Legal costs. Stress. No one wins if this turns into a fight. I agreed again. No one, I said. From the outside, it must have looked like I was losing ground. Giving time. Giving silence. Letting them move ahead. From the inside, I was letting gravity do its work. Because when people believe they've won, they stop checking their footing. And every step they took without looking became something I could later point to, quietly, precisely, when it finally mattered. The first letter arrived on cream-colored paper, heavy stock, designed to feel official before you even read it. It proposed a deadline. Not a threat, something subtler. A recommendation for efficiency. Signed by the end of the month. Avoid unnecessary review. Keep things respectful. I thanked them for the clarity and asked for an extension. 30 days. No justification. Just a request. It unsettled them more than refusal would have. Pressure, when applied too early, exposes intent. Lena called that night. Her voice had changed, still soft but sharpened at the edges. They're worried you're stalling, she said. I'm reading, I replied. She tried a different approach. Reminded me of our history. Of promises. Of how ugly things could become if this turned adversarial. She mentioned legal fees. Emotional cost. Mutual friends. I let her finish. I agree, I said. Let's keep it clean. 2 days later, the leverage shifted. I scheduled a consultation, not with a divorce attorney but with a forensic accountant. I didn't present accusations. I presented data. Bank flows. Dates. The account. The tax filings. The draft agreement. He didn't react emotionally. Professionals rarely do. He asked for permissions. I gave them. He asked for time. I gave him that too. While he worked, I adjusted something small but important. I redirected my income, lawfully, into an account solely in my name, disclosed, documented, transparent. The money didn't vanish. It simply stopped feeding their assumptions. Within a week, the tone changed. The sister called again. This time without pleasantries. You're making this difficult, she said. I'm being accurate, I replied. A revised agreement arrived. Numbers softened. Timelines stretched. A clause appeared about previously undisclosed assets, with language vague enough to be harmless or dangerous, depending on who noticed. They noticed I wasn't rushing anymore. They didn't know why. The accountant called me in. He didn't use dramatic words. He showed me charts. Parallel transfers. Intent inferred by repetition. The kind of pattern courts don't ignore. Do you want to proceed quietly, he asked, or do you want leverage? Quietly, I said. With options. We prepared a response. Not an accusation. A request for clarification. Specific questions tied to dates and amounts. Neutral language. Professional tone. A mirror held up to their planning. The reply came faster than expected. Defensive. Overexplained. Contradictory. Then Lena called, angry now, unable to hide it. Why are you digging like this? She demanded. I'm reading what's in front of me, I said. She accused me of mistrust. Of rewriting history. Of punishing her for leaving. I didn't argue. I didn't deny. I returned to the only thing that mattered. Let's disclose everything, I said. Then we can sign. Silence followed. Long, heavy. That was when I knew the pressure had reached something solid. Not her emotions, her plan. Because leverage isn't about shouting. It's about narrowing someone's options until the only way forward is through the truth. And once the truth is on paper, it stops being personal and starts being permanent. They tried money first. An offer arrived framed as generosity, an adjustment in good faith. A lump sum. Immediate access. No questions asked. The language was careful, almost kind, as if kindness could substitute for accuracy. I didn't counter. I declined politely and asked that all assets be fully disclosed before any settlement figures were discussed. The response came within hours, not days. Panic moves faster than confidence. Lena showed up at the house unannounced that evening. She stood in the doorway like she used to, coat still on, keys clenched, pretending this was casual. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, she said. I poured water into 2 glasses and slid one across the table. Bigger than what? I asked. She sat. She didn't drink. She talked instead, about stress, about how she'd carried us emotionally for years, about how she deserved security after everything she'd invested. She spoke as if money were compensation for endurance. I listened until she ran out of words. I'm not stopping you from leaving, I said. I'm asking for accuracy. Her face tightened. She reached for something sharper. You think a judge will side with you? She asked. You want this public? I want this correct, I said. Public or private doesn't change that. The next move was guilt. Messages from mutual friends, carefully worded, almost identical. She's having a hard time. You're hurting her by dragging this out. Be the bigger person. I replied to none of them. Then came urgency. A notice that the apartment she'd lined up might fall through. A suggestion that delays could cost her work opportunities. Consequences designed to look accidental. I didn't bend. The accountant sent me an update that morning. A reconciliation showing the gap between what had been disclosed and what existed. Not catastrophic. Not criminal. But undeniable. I forwarded one page, only one, to Lena's attorney with a simple note. Please advise on reconciling these figures. The silence that followed lasted 2 days. When the response came, it was different. No offers. No threats. Just a request for a meeting to clarify certain items. At the meeting, Lena didn't speak much. Her lawyer did. The sister wasn't present. That absence mattered. They asked procedural questions. They asked about sources. They asked about intent. I answered with documents. The room shifted. Not dramatically, professionally. That's how collapse begins. Not with shouting but with recalculation. They asked if I'd consider mediation. I'm open, I said. With full disclosure. They asked if I'd waive claims. After reconciliation, I said. No shortcuts. No bargains built on omission. When the meeting ended, Lena looked at me for the first time in weeks without performance. You planned this, she said quietly. No, I replied. You did. I just read it. She left before I finished packing my folder. That night the offer stopped. The messages dried up. The pressure inverted, what had once been applied to me now pressed inward on them. Because collapse doesn't always look like loss. Sometimes it looks like a narrowing hallway where every step forward requires admitting what you hoped would never be seen. And once someone realizes they can't buy silence, can't rush the clock, and can't rewrite the numbers, the only thing left to do is face what's already on record. The system didn't react all at once. It never does. It absorbed the information, processed it, and then began to respond in layers. First came the amended disclosures, quietly filed, carefully worded, noticeably thicker than before. Accounts appeared that hadn't existed on paper 2 weeks earlier. Totals shifted. Explanations followed. None of them matched the original story. No one accused anyone of anything. That's not how exposure works when it's clean. It works by comparison. The mediator asked neutral questions. Dates. Reasons. Authorization. The kind that don't invite speeches. Lena answered some. Deferred others. Her attorney began doing most of the talking. I stayed still. Took notes. Provided documents when asked. Nothing more. When institutions step in, emotion becomes irrelevant. What matters is consistency. And consistency wasn't on her side. The forensic accountant submitted his report. Not dramatic. Just methodical. Transfers flagged. Intent inferred by repetition. Risk outlined in cautious language. Enough to trigger attention without forcing conclusions. That was when the tax angle surfaced. Not as an accusation but as a possibility. Unreported interest. Misclassified transfers. Nothing that screams scandal. Enough to require correction. Corrections invite scrutiny. Lena's lawyer requested a recess. Then another. Meetings multiplied. Emails grew longer. The timeline stretched. Not because I delayed but because they needed time to explain themselves to systems that don't care about explanations. Friends stopped calling. Not because they'd chosen sides, because there was no story to repeat anymore. The drama had drained out of it, leaving only procedure. Lena tried once more to speak privately. She asked if we could reset. If we could keep this between us. It already is, I said. Between us and the paperwork. She looked smaller then. Not defeated, unmoored. Plans give people posture. Without them they slump. The revised settlement arrived at the end of the month. Full disclosure. Conservative estimates. Language stripped of flourish. Clauses tightened. Protections added, for both sides on paper but functionally for one. I reviewed it carefully. Suggested minor edits. Accepted the rest. No celebration. No relief. Just alignment. The exposure didn't ruin her life. It corrected it. That's the difference between revenge and consequence. One is personal. The other is structural. By the time signatures were scheduled, the story had stopped being interesting to anyone but the clerks. And that's how you know it's done properly. Because real accountability doesn't echo. It settles. And when it does, it leaves behind something quieter than victory, clarity, documented and complete, with nowhere left to hide. We met one last time in a conference room that smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee. Neutral space. No history in the walls. Just a table, 2 pens, and a stack of paper thick enough to end things without ceremony. Lena arrived early. She sat with her hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. No performance left. No audience to play to. When I entered, she looked up and nodded. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. The mediator reviewed the terms aloud, methodical, careful to give each clause its proper weight. Disclosure complete. Assets reconciled. Future claims waived. Boundaries defined with the precision of someone who never wanted to meet again. When it was time to speak, Lena cleared her throat. "I didn't think you'd fight," she said, not accusing, not apologizing. Just stating a miscalculation. "I didn't," I said. "I read." She absorbed that. Sat with it. Then tried once more, softer. "You could have destroyed me," she said. "You didn't." "That wasn't the point," I said. "This wasn't about punishment." She nodded, eyes wet but steady. "I thought agreeing meant you didn't care," she said. "I cared enough to stay calm," I said. "That's different." The mediator slid the documents forward. Pens followed. Signatures placed. Dates filled. The sound of paper shifting was louder than any argument we'd ever had. When it was done, Lena stood. Hesitated. "I hope you find peace," she said. "I already did," I replied. Outside, the day moved on without us. Traffic. Phones. People carrying coffee into buildings where their own quiet reckonings would never be noticed. Lena walked away first. No dramatic exit. Just a woman returning to a life that would now require accuracy. I stayed long enough to organize my folder, then left. There was no urge to explain myself to anyone. No need to reclaim reputation. The truth was already archived in places that mattered more than memory. Reckoning doesn't require confrontation. It requires boundaries that don't move when tested. And once those boundaries are signed, initialed, and filed, they stop being emotional and start being final. That's when you know you're free, not because someone else lost, but because you no longer need to prove anything at all. The first morning after it was finished, I woke without checking my phone. No deadlines. No drafts. No waiting for a reply that could change the temperature of the day. I made coffee and drank it slowly by the window. The city moved the same way it always had, but my place in it felt recalibrated, lighter, not because something good had happened, but because something heavy was no longer being carried for me by deception. I didn't tell anyone the story. Not fully. There was nothing to gain from turning process into performance. People like conclusions. They don't need the ledgers. I sold the house a few months later. Not out of necessity, out of preference. I kept what was mine, cleanly documented, uncontested. I moved to a smaller place closer to work. Fewer rooms. More quiet. On weekends I walked. No destination. Just motion. It reminded me that movement didn't have to mean escape. Lena and I didn't speak again. There was no rule against it. There was simply no reason. Boundaries, once respected by institutions, rarely need reinforcement by words. Occasionally I caught fragments, someone mentioning her new place, her job, the way things worked out. I didn't correct them. I didn't add context. Accuracy doesn't require witnesses once it's filed. What stayed with me wasn't the betrayal. It was the moment I realized agreement could be a strategy. That calm could be read as permission, until it wasn't. That systems reward those who don't rush to be believed, but take the time to be right. Power didn't return to me in a dramatic way. It arrived quietly, like a room regaining balance after a door finally closes. I slept better. I trusted myself again, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't abandoned precision for comfort. I hadn't traded truth for peace. I'd learned they could coexist. If there was a lesson, it wasn't about marriage or divorce. It was about posture. About how standing still, when everyone expects you to flail, forces the world to reveal its shape. I didn't take revenge. I didn't need to. I let the record speak. I let time finish the sentence. And when it did, there was nothing left to say.